Good morning, good afternoon, and good day. My name is Tamer Abouali. I am a partner in IBM Security Services, and today I am joined by Ozan Olayli from IBM Security Services. He is a senior managing consultant for our practice. I would like to welcome you to our Secure Wednesdays webinar series. We are committed to our clients during these challenging times. We'd like to let you know that cybersecurity is our topmost priority for our clients in addition to your health and your well-being. We've launched these webinar series called Secure Wednesdays from the beginning of April, and they are 45-minute sessions held weekly every Wednesday, 3 p.m. at GST time, and where we discuss various security topics. And today's topic will be the remote work ecosystem. So this begins our presentation, securing the remote work ecosystem. And the new norm of work now is actually remote. As we know, many of us are working remotely now. Our workers, our clients, our colleagues all over the world are working in a new setup and new environment. Today's agenda will be the new era of remote working. More than just remote connections, we'll be discussing the remote connections to the corporate network, desktop and application virtualization, remote tools such as collaboration, project management, and video conferencing, the importance of the corporate email and avoiding compromise, and also understanding third parties and integration. And lastly, how IBM Security Services can assist. Future topics and considerations, we are happy to hear from you around your topics and considerations. But what we would like to do for our future topics is now really to drill down into specific aspects of remote ecosystems, such as detection of remote work risks through use cases and threat hunting. How do we offensively assess and simulate adversaries against our remote workers? And reviewing security devices and policies, and also our third-party applications. And managing remote workers, keeping them up to date and safe, the methods and processes of doing this. We're happy to have suggestions from you on various topics. So let's talk about securing the office workspace. When our workers were on site and we're all working together and in the same locations, but physically on site, we knew the conditions were equal. From a security perspective, we were ready for the possibilities. We had an idea of what they were. And we knew which doors were closed, and there was no perfect pressure because we knew and understood the design of the game. However, in securing the remote ecosystem and remote work, the game has changed. Weak spots are known, and they will be exploited. And doors are not as solid as we believe that they were. And there's a lot of pressure in our environment in order to provide connections, laptops, connectivity. And it continues because we are now working in a different type of environment. So now let's talk about the era of remote working. So let's talk about how it used to be, or how it is when you have the regular remote worker. So what does the remote connection look like today? What are we aware of? Well, we have a remote worker. That remote worker has a business requirement in order to connect to the environment. They need to be able to have a user ID, password, being able to have strong authentication. They will connect to the domain. They'll be able to read their email. They will need connections to various internal applications. They'll be able and need to connect via RDP, connecting to various other Windows servers and applications. This was a very understood and innocent time for us, where we knew what our remote workers were doing because there was a much more controlled population of remote workers. It was reasonable and it was fairly simple. Now, the adversary in this case, when a remote worker's session is taken over, An adversary sees your domain differently than you do. That adversary now, if he has taken over the session of a remote worker, they are able to access in various different ways. So, for example, that adversary now, the entire environment, configuration, architecture, vulnerabilities are now open to that attacker. So, for example, if the attacker is able now to access the customer data, then they'll be able to through the internal VPN pool or being able to access a server. They will also be able to access other servers and being able to pivot into network share drives and look for credentials in files as well too. And being able to look for the weakest link in our servers, in our environment, to be able to gain access to a domain, to be able to escalate privileges, possibly access OT environments, accounting servers, and so on. Once an adversary takes over a remote worker session, the environment they have access to is everything that our remote workers have access to, but maybe other items which we were not aware that they have access to, and also various configuration or vulnerabilities in the environment they will exploit. So how do we understand the remote connections of a corporate environment? What are the dimensions we need to understand when we're evaluating our remote ecosystem? So we look at it in a few dimensions: the user directory, the network, the IT resources themselves, the applications, and also detection and response. For the actual users themselves, we first need to understand who these users are, what domain they're part of. Are they part of one domain, two domains, three domains? And what are the actual rights and privileges within those domains? And then within the groups and the VPN permissions themselves, what are the VPN permissions? Where are they allowed to go to? From a network perspective, what is the authentication policy? How are you authenticating your users? Is it through VPN? It should be. Is it multi-factor authentication, or is it certificate-based? You'd be surprised the amount of corporations that have rogue remote accesses. They're mature organizations and they're unaware of it. And where these rogue parts of the organization may not be following policies, and then breaches and issues come as a result of not following those policies. So ensure that every area within your organization is following those remote authentication policies. Also, within the other parts of the network, the VPN profiles and VPN pool, what are they allowed access to? And additionally, from a network ACL perspective, what are the sites and the services from a network perspective that users will traverse? The other item is the IT resources, or the servers themselves. How is remote desktop done? Who are the power users? What are the access rights? Who has root? And how are you controlling privileged access to these environments and the vulnerabilities as well too? Are you managing them? Are you aware of them? They will be much more exposed in the new remote ecosystem. Additionally, applications, understanding the user rights, their profiles, vulnerabilities, database accesses, provisioning, how is that done? And then looking across all of these dimensions and understanding detection and response. Have you created very specific use cases to look for escalation of privileges? Have you created use cases to look for new administrators that are popping up, or use of PS exec throughout the environment? In the remote ecosystem, there has to be a new set of use cases that specifically look at the new paradigm of a remote ecosystem. Additionally, you need to also understand how will you respond. How will things be automated in the same way in terms of incident response? What will the playbooks look like? What will the responses and procedures look like? Your IT staff will not have the same hands-on access to user workstations or the workstations that they needed in order to gather files and folders and various logs. It's a different environment when we're all working remotely. So as part of your incident response processes, they should be calibrated for the new remote ecosystem, and also having the tools that are required in order to gather the various types of logs, in order to conduct investigations and to monitor the environment. What we're seeing is the paradigm and desperation grow. We've done a number of network searches throughout the internet, and what we're seeing is RDP protocol port 3388 is on the rise in a significant way. This is likely due to desperation of users not knowing how to provide remote access to their user population. Globally, we've seen many RDP connections, but what we've also noticed is 8% of them are vulnerable to Bluekeep and other vulnerabilities. In Bluekeep, you're looking at, of course, remote code execution. But within the Middle East and Africa region, we're also seeing RDP sessions on the increase. 28,000 in Turkey, 27,000 in South Africa, 5,000 in Saudi Arabia, and so on. Unsecure remote desktop protocol sessions that could be used as a point of compromise within the network and the environment. So now let's take a look at, what are the various aspects and tools that are being provided to our remote workforce. And what we see is that, many of our clients are, in desperation trying to give up laptops, making existing laptops usable for the corporate environment. We're seeing an increase, of course, of VDI, virtual desktops, and the use of application virtualization. This is a very good tool to use, VDI, in that it is a virtual desktop. It can provide your users a standardized desktop. It is controlled by IT. You can centrally enforce your policies. It's much more easier than BYOD, and you can maintain your security policies and procedures. Application virtualization, similarly, you can run it centralized. You understand and control the image. You can encapsulate it from the operating system and restrict OS access. And you can also maintain security and compliance. However, the items that we need to be aware of that in VDI are not secured by default. So when you put in a VDI environment, you have to ensure that you customize the policies within VDI to your specific environment, and that not all users should have the exact same image. Different users will have different requirements. Additionally, patching is important, as if you have a patching issue, if you haven't patched once, it becomes exponential to the thousands or hundreds of users that you have. So this becomes very, very, very important. And from an application perspective, it is important also to keep the virtualized application up to date. Again, a patch that's required for one because it's virtualized, it is required for all. So it becomes critical to really understand how you're using desktop virtualization and application virtualization. So many of our users are now, we have provided them access, and we are using collaborative tools in order to work with our colleagues, to work with our clients, and to work with people all around the world. We're using tools such as Slack in order to collaborate with our groups. We're using project management tools such as Trello boards in order to track and to manage what we're doing, and also the various video conference tools such as Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting. However, from a security perspective, we need to be aware of the various security and risk mitigation aspects of our collaborative tools, such as the possible sensitive data leakage, for example, in Trello boards, knowing and understanding who's in our Trello boards and what type of information we're putting in there, the criticality of the corporate email account and securing it, monitoring throughout the environment. In the collaborative workspace, we also need to be monitoring, creating use cases and event triggers, and understanding the vulnerabilities within collaborative tools. We'll see in the next slide that there are various vulnerabilities that we need to be aware of, and also controlling and providing the right guidance to our users for remote video conferencing, so that we avoid uninvited guests and room trolls. For example, not sharing specific information related to a room ID and only providing it at specific times, and also changing it. So what do we mean by that in terms of collaborative security issues? Well, using Zoom as an example, it's quite easy in order to do a search and find various Zoom IDs of corporations and know who is using Zoom, and then going to those actual sites and going to that actual Zoom site, and then seeing if you can click on the admin and finding out and putting in a false ID, and then getting a response that lets you know who the admin is. And then, we've seen various issues such as famous people such as Boris Johnson, whose Zoom room was known, and then he had uninvited guests. So ensuring that you are really using these tools securely. We've seen, not to push so much on Zoom, but we've seen quite a bit of vulnerabilities and issues and users' IDs and passwords that have been found and dumped in various boards and on the dark web. Zoom has also advised that there have been many user IDs and passwords that have been dumped in various boards. So we advise, of course, to change those credentials. However, Zoom isn't alone. This is an example of Slack. And as you can see, Slack has had many vulnerabilities, from remote execution of code to be able to taking over of session IDs and various other security issues that they've had through their own bug bounty programs. And as we can see throughout about a year or two, we've seen over 1,000 Slack security vulnerability issues that needed to be patched and dealt with in order for risk mitigation. Trello, another example. If you are looking for Trello user IDs and passwords, it's quite easy to use Google and find a dump of these on the internet. So it's very important from a Trello perspective to review the user accounts defined in these Trello boards. Avoid sharing of confidential information on those boards, and knowing who you're inviting to your boards. And limiting the external integration to boards, reviewing regularly what's on your public boards, scan them, look at them, understand them, know the type of information that you're sharing, that your users are sharing, so that you are aware. Now, the corporate email account is now the passport to many collaboration tools. In fact, from one corporate email account, it is the way in order to access various tools such as collaboration and video conferencing. This provides ease of use for our users and for our environment. However, now the corporate email account becomes, the corporate user account becomes very important, in that we need to protect and need to inform our users, how to use these safely. But we also need to understand that we need to enforce strong password policies, user policies. After lockouts, we should lock them out and disable them depending on if they're being used inappropriately. Protect against password spraying, such as using CAPTCHA, and also, most importantly, using a strong form of authentication, such as MFA, for all logins, all areas, such as VPN, collaboration tools, mail, and so on. And also following public password disclosure dumps. If there's a disclosure where passwords have been dumped, have a look at it and understand it. And again, I will remind you that you'd be surprised the amount of corporations that aren't using strong passwords, authentication, or MFA, or areas within their corporation which are using unregulated forms of strong authentication. So another important aspect now is with third-party integration is understanding who's in our environment. Many corporations work with partners, work with integrators, work with consulting companies, and will have various types of accesses for these third parties within their environment. So it is important to understand within this ecosystem to understand who is in your environment. So, what are they doing in your environment? It's important to sort of draw a graph and understand, okay, what are the applications they have access to? What are the IPs? What is the footprint they have in my environment? And what are they doing? Are they supporting? Are they maintaining? Are they testing? Are they developing? What are the issues? You need to understand your integration points in order to better manage security and know what sort of security controls you need to provide in your environment so that you can safely have your partners and your integrators in your environment. So this will include things such as network security, of course, restricting the connections that they need and defining the scope that they need, understanding the types of IDs that you're using and how they're authenticating as well too. How are they gaining access? Is it VPN and then is it via VDI? What are the specific access mechanisms that they are using? And then understanding the risk that third parties into your ecosystem bring to you, understanding from a security perspective what their level of security maturity is. Have you audited them? Do you understand what security risks that they bring to you? So making sure to plot this out and to understand your exposure to your third parties. And probably something that is not done in many environments is creating specific use cases for your third parties and your partners in order to monitor, for example, if they are attempting to gain access to something that they shouldn't be. Is there some sort of escalation of privilege that is being attempted? Creating these types of use cases is very important. But again, it's the focus on, do I have a specific set of use cases for my third parties and my integrations in order to manage, monitor, and maintain risk exposures in my environment? There are many other areas throughout the remote ecosystem. We've touched on a few, but a few others, such as the increase of shadow IT. If you've standardized on AWS, then you need to be aware of others who may want to use Google Cloud and understanding what they're putting there. If they have access to files and folders that could inappropriately be put on a cloud provider that has not been authorized. So data security becomes critical, especially now with the remote workforce who may not have the same level of scrutiny as they should when they're on site, as you're evolving and ensuring that they do. Repositories such as GitHub and developers will continue to work, and you will continue to need them now and for the foreseeable future. However, those developers may be remote. So it's important to understand for these repositories that sensitive data is prevented from being put on these repositories, such as specific keys, settings, specific client data, for example. So it's important to have policies and monitor, but also to scan for these as well too. Sharing of platforms and services that are used for sharing of files and folders is also important that you provide a standard method and way for doing this so that you protect in terms of what is being shared in terms of file sharing platforms. So getting getting to the end, what Albert Einstein said is that the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. We are now experiencing change, and I think this is positive change because we're learning to work in a different mode, expanding our ability, expanding our ability to work and utilization, and more importantly, efficiency. So although we are changing, it is really now we are expanding our ability, and our ability to change is a measure of our intelligence. So how can IBM help? Help that ensure that as you change, that you're secure in terms of your remote ecosystem. So a few slides on how we can help you that are related to some of the aspects of the remote ecosystem that we went over. So first, we can help you evaluate the overall remote ecosystem, all aspects of it. So for example, we can help you identify and remediate security risks related to tools and applications, as we talked about, understanding identities, the systems, the integrations, and the network. We have a framework that we use that we look at various aspects throughout the remote ecosystem. Some of the maybe more interesting ones that we find many corporations require is the Security Operations Center and how you gain visibility into specific areas of the remote work ecosystem. And also item number 10, such as understanding the identities and users and how you govern them and what they do and how they do, and ensuring that you have the right set of profiles that only allow users access to applications and portions of the network that they should only have access to and nothing else. Security awareness. Probably one of the most important topics. The general topics that we are all aware of is phishing, password security, clean desk policies, BYOD, wireless connections, things like that. However, there are new aspects that we need to be aware of and incorporating into our security awareness programs, such as security in the home network. How do you establish a secure network within your home so that your users can connect and do their work securely and efficiently and according to your security policies? Collaboration and teleconference security. We talked about this in terms of Trello and other collaborative boards that are used and the policies and procedures associated with that. The importance of the corporate email account, data sharing, and also the onset of targeted phishing campaigns that are specifically targeted at the remote worker and gaining access and sessions into the corporate environment. Many other aspects that are needed for the new remote work ecosystem, but these are some of them that you should consider within updating your security awareness program. Threat hunting and threat hunting within our environments a few months ago, based on a theory and an approach and looking for specific things. However, within the remote ecosystem now, there are new cases that we need to take a look at and new theories and possibilities that we need to understand. So specifically, threat hunting within the remote work ecosystem is something that needs to be done, and looking at specific cases in threat hunting in this new type of ecosystem. So for example, in a two-factor authentication access, multiple unsuccessful attempts on the second factor or other factors, or unusual lockouts, unusual geographical logins. Things like this we need to now hunt and follow and see where it leads us to. So since our users are the ones that are targeted by many adversaries, it's important to also look at how they are specifically being targeted. So creating offensive simulations that target our remote workers in order to understand, and test. So coming up with an approach in terms of how we're going to simulate an attack on them, simulate the campaign, understand the goals, see what we're going to be able to extrapolate from the environment, see how we can take over environments. The idea here is offensively assess and simulate those who would attack our workers and our environment. A specific campaign targeted at that. And lastly, in terms of reviewing the overall environment, looking and reviewing all of the security controls related to the devices and your third-party applications to the specific value that you're looking to understand. So, the control design objectives within NIST and MITRE and CIS configuration benchmarks. How do they map to our specific IT assets and tools, such as identities, such as our infrastructure, and so on? And then how do we get value from those things? Are we really now reducing risk caused by misconfiguration if we're using CIS and how it's mapped to our environment and how we're using it? How are we really now getting value? So understanding the correlation and the mapping of all of these is extremely important. So we'd like to thank you for your time, and we'd like to invite you to continue coming to our Wednesday sessions, Secure Wednesdays. And at this time, we are happy now to take any questions or comments that you may have. Myself, Tamer, Abouali, and Ozan would like to take your questions. So please ask. Thank you. So we have one question so far, and it is: can the link to the presentation be provided? And yes, we will provide a link to the presentation shortly after. If there are any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, actually, Tamer, Edmore asked for to get the link after the session to be able to access the presentation. So maybe we can provide that laterly to the attendees.
Yes.
And I got a question that I can share with the attendees, and I can try to answer that if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Okay. One of our attendees asked that what are the testing methodologies to identify current potential threats that are coming to virtual desktop environment or remotely connected environments? So I can give a brief about our testing methodologies and approach. Actually, we are working in a different way from traditional penetration testing approach. Like, we prefer to act like attackers to identify potential security weaknesses. So we use MITRE attack framework to simulate the attacks from initial access, execution, privilege escalation to CNC communications and exfiltration phases. So we simulate all the attack phases. We take attack techniques as a guidance for testing activities, and we use most common attack tools, as well as we developed our custom attack scripts to address all potential security issues in your VDI or remote work environment. So the output of those activities are the current strengths and weaknesses for protection, detection, and response capabilities of the company. And we provide a detailed report for all the activities that we have done during the attack phases and the detection capabilities and everything. So we address all the issues with the MITRE framework, and we simulate all the techniques there for your environment. If you have another question, I can try to answer also.
Thank you very much, Ozan. If there are any other questions or comments, please use the Q&A tool on the screen there on the website, and we'd be happy to answer them. Okay, we'll wait just another minute if there's any other questions. All right, then thank you very much. We'd like to thank you for attending our webinar today. And we'd like to also make sure that you're welcomed, and we're having another webinar next Wednesday. Thank you very much for attending. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.